Ciao friends! In this video I'm going to unbox the new DAX Query View feature in Power BI Desktop. Yes, Microsoft released in November 2023 a new version of Power BI Desktop that has the ability to write and run DAX queries within Power BI Desktop, just like we always did by using an external tool like DAX Studio. The feature that we have in Power BI Desktop can also enable you to write the new definition of a measure back into the model without leaving Power BI Desktop, something that DAX Studio is not able to do. However, we will also see that there are many features in DAX Studio that are still only available in DAX Studio. So DAX Studio is here to stay, but now we can finally just execute a simple DAX query within Power BI Desktop, and we have a new integrated user experience to create and modify measures that will make Power BI Desktop much more productive when you have to modify measures, test measures, and modify measures of your model. So I'm very excited. Let's start with the demo. So let's start unboxing the new DAX Query View in Power BI Desktop. As you see, we have this new icon, the DAX Query View, which is visible because I enabled in the preview properties the preview of this feature. This is the latest version of Power BI Desktop released in November 2023, and in the preview features we have this setting that has been enabled. So when you enable it, you have to restart Power BI Desktop, and at that point you will see this icon. So what happens when we click on this icon? Let's see this together. So you see that we have already a query generated for us, which shows the top and 100 rows of customers. Of course, this is an editor that I can zoom in, but finally we don't have a window that we open and override the report. This is a dedicated area where we can write our own query. So let's just start this query and we see the result. So this is pretty much similar to what we do in DAX Studio, for example, where basically what we can do, we can write evaluate and we can write the name of the table, for example, customer, and then just click run. And we see the result here. So as you see, we already noticed that there is a difference with DAX Studio, which is the following. Basically, there is a limitation for the result that we can analyze. And this limitation is probably something that makes it safer to use the feature, because in DAX Studio, if you run a query with millions of rows, you might wait for minutes or you can go out of memory. So this is certainly something good. You see that now the rows have been limited to 76,000 because we are querying a large table with many columns. And I have to say, I've been pretty much impressed by the performance of the visualization. Indeed, if I, for example, write all customer key, so if I limit the visualization to just one column, I think I should be able to see many more rows. Maybe I will hit the limit of 1 million rows, which indeed is the limitation that I hit now. So before I was hitting the 15 megabytes of data, and now I'm hitting the limit of 1 million rows. As you see, the navigation is pretty fast. There is still some bug. You see that now I'm going to at the bottom of the list. This is supposed to have 1 million rows. It's not working very much, but again, it's the first release, and I have to say I already tried this feature before, and it's pretty solid. I want to show you the many features we have. So the idea is that, okay, what can we do with a DAX query? Which kind of DAX queries we can create? Of course, if you know DAX very well, you can create complex queries. But let's start from simple things, because of course, now I'm already querying a table. I had a suggestion for top N, but what is the thing that I can do more often when I'm developing a model? For example, in this model, I have measures. Like, for example, if I write evaluate sales amount, you see this syntax doesn't work because IntelliSense is not helping me. Well, I have to know that I have to type curly braces. I have to type curly braces and then the name of a measure. I'm still not used to this editor. So curly braces and, for example, sales amount. So this is the minimum that I can do to create a measure. And if I click run, I basically create a query that has one row, one column, and here at the bottom, I see the result of sales amount. Now, why should I do that? Well, because if I right-click, if you see, when I click on this measure reference, this icon here, this light bulb, suggests me that I could do something. And for example, I could define this measure. So when I define the measure, I bring into the DAX Query View the definition of the measure, in this case, sales amount, which means that I can now modify this measure, for example. So I can still run it. If I modify this measure, for example, I multiply this by 2, you will see, please check the number here, now is 102 something. When I run this again, this is now double the value. Now, what is interesting at this point, though, is that the definition of the measure, that is a measure that we have in the model, is a measure that is different from the measure we have in the model. Indeed, we have this hint that says, do you want to override the measure? Do you want to update the model? What does it mean? I can actually click on this link, and if I do that, now I will replace the existing sales amount measure with the definition I have in the query view. Now, if you're used to DAX Studio, you can do the same in DAX Studio up to the point where we test the measure with the modified DAX formula, but then we have to copy and paste the formula back into Power BI Desktop, because DAX Studio cannot write a new definition into Power BI Desktop. You can do that in Tabular Editor, but Tabular Editor doesn't have an integrated query view experience like DAX Studio. It actually has some query view, but you have to also get the Tabular Editor 3, which is the commercial version. This is not available in the free version. So now this is a feature that we have in Power BI Desktop. And before I click on this line, let me show you what is going to happen. So you see that now the sales amount is 10 billion something, and the margin is 5 billion something. And so if now I go back to my DAX Query View and I say, okay, update the model, look at what happens. So first of all, are you sure there is no undo? Maybe that would be a good thing, having the undo, but let's confirm that. Now, if I go back to my query view, you see that now we have 20 billion something, 16 billion something, because we have these, we doubled the value of sales amount and we increased the margin by around 10 billion something. So that's quite nice. So this is already something that got me happy, because as a DAX developer, having the ability to do this kind of editing integrated in Power BI Desktop after so many years where I had to use other editors is really, really good. Now, let's take a look at what how can Power BI Desktop help me? Because in DAX Studio, we had some feature that helped us. And let me show you also to give you a reminder of which features we have in DAX Studio to do something similar to what I did now. So let's go back in DAX Studio. Not back. Let's open DAX Studio connecting to this model. And let's write, for example, evaluate and sales amount, just like I did in my Power BI report. So I can run this query and I can see the result. So far, so good. I would say that this is a little bit more, I would say, demo friendly. You see that I can zoom in and zoom out this area. If I go back in Power BI Desktop, I can just use I'm using the Zoom It, which is a tools from SysInternals, a free tool from SysInternals that I use to zoom and highlight parts of the video. But I can zoom just the editor. I don't have a dynamic zoom of the result, which for the demos it's okay. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not necessary, but yeah, we like this. What about defining the sales amount? So one thing that you notice, so I had a light bulb in the editor, because what you have with the DAX Query View is a full DAX parser, which means that the editor is completely aware of the syntax, something we don't have in DAX Studio, because DAX Studio doesn't have a full DAX parser, like, for example, Tabular Editor 3, which has similar features because of the ability to understand the meaning of the DAX language. So what we have to do, if we want to obtain in the same definition of the query, the definition of sales amount, we have to look for the sales amount measure, we right click and we have this menu with define measure and many other features. So define measure is what we did in the previous example. Let me just zoom out a little bit. And this is the definition of a single measure. Now, do we have something similar in Power BI Desktop? Yes. So if I go in Power BI Desktop and I click on the measure, for example, sales amount. So let me remove everything from here. So let's start from a clean window that has nothing. So if I right-click sales amount, you see that we have this quick queries menu that has a number of options here. That's good. So let's start with the quick queries evaluate. And you see that evaluate just evaluate my measure without doing anything else. I would say it is not necessary to use summarized columns for this kind of evaluation, but that's fine. That's fine because maybe that we can select multiple measures, right-click, quick measure, evaluate, it's just one. I mean, you could have used the multiple measures, something that can be improved. Okay, so if I had the multiple selection, I would expect to have multiple measures evaluated at the same time. So far, so good. So let's go back to sales amount, and let's go back in the quick queries, and let's try the second option, define and evaluate. So if I click on define and evaluate, you see that what I get is the complete syntax that define the measure and evaluate the measure. So now I'm back into the same situation where I was in DAX Studio. I have both the definition and the evaluation. I can run the query, I can see the result, I can change the query, which is something I can do in DAX Studio. But what I don't have in DAX Studio is this, update model, overwrite measure. And again, this is very, very good. So let me go back to the original version of this measure. Something I noticed is that, maybe we will see this later, sometimes while the measure is evaluated, the measure is updated in the model, you could click on update measure again, and so the second click would say the measure has been changed, or so there could be some error, something probably that has to be fixed. But again, this is the first public release of this feature, and I have to say I'm impressed. I'm impressed because it is very solid. I can actually use it day by day, and yes, there is some bug, but I mean, also DAX Studio has some bug, come on. And everybody has bugs in the software. It's just a question of how much time it needs to fix the bugs. That's another story. We will see in the next release how many bugs they fix. Now, so let's complete the exploration of these evaluates. So the third option is define. Okay, let's go to the last topic, because the third option is something I want to show you in DAX Studio before, but let's go and define all the measures in this model. So what happens if I click on define all the measures in this model? Now you see that we have, in this case, yes, summarized columns with all the measures, and the define section has the definition of all the measures. Now, if you have 1,000 measures, I don't know, I didn't try with a very complex model what happens. That's some of the tests I have to do. I actually tried, let's say, complex queries, and the performance is, let's say, much better than previous version of Power BI Desktop. It can still be improved. Tabular Editor 3, I would say, is the gold standard in terms of editing complex DAX queries and complex DAX expressions. Tabular Editor 3 is way faster, way faster, but for most, let's say, simple and medium complexity expressions, Power BI Desktop is already good with the new DAX Query View experience. When we approach 1,000 lines or more, or even just a few hundreds, it could be that you notice something that is, I mean, is not ideal. Especially if you have to spend time going back and forth and editing parts of the query. Tabular Editor 3 is still way faster and more productive, but the improvement has been impressive. I had to be honest. I mean, there is nothing to hide. Now, do we have this feature? Did we have this feature in DAX Studio? Let's go back and try. So if I go back to DAX Studio, I have actually two options. One is that I can go, I can click on a table, and when you click on a table, you have these two options. So the approach is slightly different. We can define all the measures that are defined within a table and all the measures of all the tables in the model. So what I did now in Power BI Desktop is the latter. So define all measures of all the tables. What we don't have in DAX Studio is automatic definition of an evaluate with all the measures. Actually, I don't know if it is. We never received this request, to be honest, but it makes sense in in Power BI Desktop to provide this kind of feature because I would say the user of Power BI Desktop is supposed not to have a formal experience of the DAX query syntax. So let's say DAX Studio in a way is a tool for more advanced users, whereas DAX Query View in Power BI Desktop has to be used by anyone. So having a way to get something to start is probably a good idea. We actually never received a request like that for the features to add to DAX Studio. Now that we have in Power BI Desktop, probably is not needed, but that's that was just to compare the two approaches. Now, one thing we have though in DAX Studio, we always had in DAX Studio, is the following. So for example, if I click on margin percentage and I define a measure, you see that margin percentage depends on margin and sales amount. Now I would like to see the definition of margin and sales amount, and of course I can go to margin and I can define a measure and so on. Now if I say I want to define dependent measures, what happens? If I say define a dependent measure for margin percentage, I see margin percentage, margin, sales amount, total cost, all the measures that are referenced in a direct or indirect way from the measure that I selected. And this could be very useful to analyze the dependencies in a complex DAX expression so that we have all the measures in the query view, because this way we can see the side effect of underlying measure into the final result. For example, if we modify total cost, but we don't have the margin percentage defined as a measure in the query view, then if we use the margin percentage measure in the report, in the query, that will use the definition of total cost from the model. So only when all the measures that are involved in the calculation are in the query view, their version is used. Otherwise, when you invoke a measure that is in the model, all the dependencies come from the model. And this doesn't change in Power BI Desktop. It is how the engine works. So for this reason, this feature is so useful. If I want to investigate on what happens in margin percentage, I want to see the entire list of dependencies, because I might want to change any part of the dependencies, and this impacts on what happens next. It's a good point that if I have I don't know, imagine I write here in DAX Studio, evaluate margin percentage, right? So based on what I said, I could change total cost. So if I run this query, I see a number, 0.56, and I multiply this by 3, and I run this again. Now this number is completely different. Now it's negative. So you see that changing total cost is changing the value of margin percentage. If I remove this margin percentage here, even though I change total cost, that definition of total cost is not used. You see that this is 0.56. So this should explain why it is so important having everything in the same view. Now, do we have something similar in Power BI Desktop? Yes, but before looking at that, please pay attention. Now, imagine I made changes, and after a few minutes I talk, I forgot. What did I change? Now, in DAX Studio, I have to keep in mind, I modify total cost. I have no evidence in DAX Studio of what has been modified compared to what we had in Power BI Desktop, in the model, I would say, because this works also for analysis services. So that is the situation now. I mean, it's good, but we have to remember, we have to keep in mind, we have to write a comment, something, what did we change in the list of measures that contribute to the evaluation of margin percentage? Now, let's do the same in Power BI Desktop. And let's try to do the same. So let's go in margin percentage and quick queries, and I can do define and evaluate, which we have seen before, will just produce the definition of margin percentage, but I can choose define with references and evaluate, which means that we can do this. We can actually, we ask margin percentage, but what we see are all the measures that contribute to the evaluation of margin percentage. So it's defined dependent measure that I mentioned before, plus we have, in this case, an evaluate statement that shows all the measures that are involved in this list. So far, so good. Now, if I do the same, so if I run this query, of course, I see the 4 results. I have to say, one thing that I'm just noticing, the results are not formatted. And that is something, imagine you have to spend time looking at the, so how can I know that this is 10, so this is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, so this is 10 billion, but it takes a while to understand the form, because without the format, it's harder to read. This is something that, if I include here sales amount, you will see that when I run this query, there's an automatic format here that automatically display the data in a way that is easier to read. That is something that would be good in Power BI Desktop too. But let's go back to our idea. So let's say that we do the same change in total cost. So I double the total cost. Now, because I modify the total cost, and because the DAX Query View knows the syntax that we write, understands the DAX syntax, it recognizes that this is the only measure that changed. Of course, I could do the same here, multiply by 3, and then at this point, we have 2 measures that have been modified, and each one has been marked as modified. And assuming that this is the change that I want to keep in my model, then I have to click on each link to update the model for each measure. Doing some tests, I have to say, having to click twice, so I have to click here, confirm, and then click here, and confirm again. And well, I would like to do both. And you see now I click and I confirmed and nothing happened. So did it change total cost or not? So if I go to total cost here, let's take a look. Let's go in the model view. No, I think this is good. So if I go not in visual, I don't want to see this. Come on, let's see. When I start to lose the view, so this is build the visual. I want to see the model. I'm still not getting used to the new user interface. So let's go in data. Here we go. So I want to see the definition of total cost is multiply 2 and sales amount multiply 3. This is the bug I mentioned before. So now I click and I confirmed, but the DAX Query View still says override measure. So now it seems that I modified the total cost measure and now it's gone. So it's probably something in the refresh of the editor that is not working well. I expect this will be fixed, but that's fine. I mean, it's much better than what we had until 1 week ago. So that's good. That's good. It will improve. Now, I think that the only missing feature from my point of view is the ability to say I want to confirm all these measures. So in a single operation, I would like to confirm both, because from my point of view, they are part of the same calculation. The fact that I have to confirm each one by one is a little bit error prone. Imagine in a long list, I could lose I could lose the focus on which part I modified. This again is not confirming, so this action cannot be undone. Okay, that now it works. Anyway, so I mean, it's a different way of editing a large amount of measure, because imagine this: you can quickly do a search and replace in this editor. And by the way, we didn't mention that we have this format query that actually can format a query. I have to say is not as good as DAX Formatter. Let me explain you why. So if I go back in DAX Studio and I paste this code and I click Format Query, you see that let's use short line and long line. Here we go. Well, I don't know why also this summarize column has not been formatted. This should have been formatted this way, so there is a bug here too. Anyway, the idea is that the summarize column should be formatted this way, so having the two parameters, the name of the column and the expression, all on the same line. I find it more readable compared to this approach where we have one parameter for each line. Another thing I don't like is the use of the tab instead of the 4 spaces, which is a standard. It's also a standard for the DAX editor when you are in a model view or in the report. So the way the code is formatted is different, and I would say not completely consistent with the formula editor, the DAX formula editor. But again, it's better than nothing, and we always have a DAX formatter if we want to use a different format. But so far so good. So this is something we can use, and of course we can comment and uncomment section of the file. We have find, replace, and this comment palette provides us information about the shortcut we can use for each operation in the editor, which is very good because it's something we can use to learn how to use shortcuts to immediately find code. So, well, let's say that is good. I mean, this is introducing a new way to edit the code. We can also add measures. So, for example, if I write measure sales double sales, and I write sales amount multiplied by 2, something like that, you see that now this has been recognized as a new measure that should be added. So if I add this measure, now I have the new measure double sales, and if I modify this measure again, this should be now an update mode of override measure. So I would say there is, I find it that there are always too many clicks to do. For example, what about a shortcut to override the measure? That would be another interesting feature. I don't want to use too many clicks moving the hands from the keyboard to the mouse is not very productive from my point of view. But I mean, that's good. One thing that I didn't find a way to do that. If I want to delete a measure, I mean, I can easily delete the measure from the editor, but now I have to go here and delete the measure from the list of measures in the tables or from the model. So I didn't find a way to delete the measure from the model by using the editor. That's another thing I would like to be able to do. So let's restore the regular code. And this is nice. You see that if I delete, so this multiplied by 1 is recognized as a change in the definition of the measure. But if I delete the code, the code is unchanged now. And the interesting thing is that just the presence of a few spaces doesn't mean that we change the code. I mean, this could be good and bad, because this means that the format of the measure does not contribute to analyze the differences. So the differences should be semantic. So there should be a difference in the syntax in order to highlight that the measure changed and in order to enable you to override the measure from the DAX Query View. I mean, I would like to be able to just modify the shape of a measure without changing the semantic. I mean, you can always do this. You can always write 1+, and then you update, and then you remove this again. And then at this point, I guess that because I made 2 changes using the format, the change I applied, including these 4 spaces, should have been applied to the definition of the sales amount. As you see now, we have here the 4 spaces. So and the measure has been formatted going to different lines. Originally, it was on a single line. So that's something else that we have to pay attention to. So, but in general, the idea is that the DAX Query View, I would say, it's good for 70–80% of the use cases where we use DAX Studio just to edit a measure or to run a query to test a measure without having to go into the report. But another use case for DAX Studio is or was the following. What if I want to capture a query that is generated by a visual? So for example, here we have a table with a few measures. So if I go in Optimize Performance Analyzer and I click on the button, I had to start recording, and I click on this button so that I want to analyze this visual. You see that this matrix generated this execution, and now we have 2 links here. Copy query copies the query in the clipboard, which is what we used to paste the code in DAX Studio before. But I have the second option, run in DAX Query View. So if I click on the second link, what happens is that the entire query is copied into the DAX Query View, and the code is already executed. We see here the result of the query. So everything at once. So this is way quicker. I mean, copy and paste in DAX Studio always took some time, also just to switch between one window and another. That's good. I would say that's good. What can we do with this result? Well, as long as we are in Power BI Desktop, not much. We can just look at the result here. Yes, we can copy this result in the clipboard and paste, for example, in Excel. And I will recap the differences at the end. This is a feature where, I mean, DAX Studio has more options about what to do with the result. But again, this is a very, very, I mean, we can do this internally to Power BI Desktop. We can retrieve the query executed by a visual, and then we can use this, for example, to export this data, not to export, but to copy the query into some other tool that want to consume this result from the data set for other purposes, for example. So that could be an interesting thing. Finally, take a look at the message here. DAX queries are kept when you save the report. What does it mean? Well, if I now close this report and I open it again, the queries that I used have been saved there, so they are part of the report. Which make me think, what many people would like to probably have at this point is the ability to write a custom DAX query, like for example, I don't know, even just this one. Imagine you create, not this one. Imagine you create a complex calculation that produces a single value. Would you like to have this pasted into, not pasted, but displayed into a car visual? Why not? Of course, one problem is how do we pass the parameters, because the issue is the following. If we take a look at the query that has been generated by a visual, this query has all the parameters we might have in the visual. Now we don't have parameters here, but if I go back here and I, for example, select Fabricam and select Home Appliances, now I have two selections in two visuals. And if I go back to Performance Analyzer and I refresh all the visuals again and I look at the matrix here and I run the code in DAX Query View, now you see that the first lines of the query include the two filters that I applied to the other two visuals. So every query contains all the other, let's say, parameters or filters that are part of the input of the user in the report that influence that visual. I don't know with this syntax, I mean, we don't have a way, unless the Microsoft introduces something else, just having the ability to display a query into the visual will not solve many problems, because it will not be interactive, right? So in order to make a feature like displaying the result of a DAX query in a visual, in order to make this meaningful, we should also have a way to intercept the filters that are in the applied to the visual from other visuals. And so in a way, we need something. I would say this is more like a measure that returns a table, for example, that could do that. So I don't know. I mean, at first sight, it's interesting, because you may say, oh, I want to display the result of this query into the report, and I agree that there are cases where we want to do that, but as the syntax that we have today will not interact with the remaining part of the report. So it will be something completely isolated and not configurable. So probably we have to see the problem from a different perspective. The way we have to see this idea of the queries that are saved in the report could be, well, we have queries that we use to test the measures, to extract list of exceptions, to do data quality analysis. And so you might imagine you have these queries that the user don't see because the user only consume reports, but that you during the development can use to run your own test, for example. That could be an interesting thing, because these queries are stored as part of the report, as part of the PBX file, and you can use them later. So that's very interesting. So what is that? I don't know if I mentioned everything, because as you see, this is probably I can sometimes I take it for granted that this you know, having seen all the features once, now you remember everything. But actually, this idea of having the measures, for example, here now there is something that is not working. When I move the cursor over a measure reference, I should see the light bulb that tells me, oh, I can edit this measure. You see that because this summarized columns is defining a variable, I'm not sure that this is the problem. So let's try to write evaluate here and remove the code here. So let's see if this is the problem. No, so it's not working. So there is still some bug. Let's see if it's working here. No, yeah, you see that now this is working here. So there is something that, so in several cases, I noticed also in the early beta that I had access to, not always the light bulb intercepts the major reference and suggests the define that we would like to have. But again, that's an initial first version. For a version 1, I'm used to much worse experience, so that's very good. Let me recap. Now, a comment I already have seen in several interaction on Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on is, okay, now we can get rid of DAX Studio. Well, no. We simply don't need DAX Studio in many cases. Okay, in many cases where it is a trivial use of DAX Studio, like, okay, I have a query, I run the query, I see the result, well, we don't need it because now we have an integrated experience. But let's take a look at DAX Studio, because there are a few features that are not present at all in the DAX Query View. So let's start. For example, we can have here the analysis of the query plan and the execution time. So if I run the query now, I can see the query plan and I can see an analysis of the execution, where the time has been spent in the formula engine, the storage engine, with a visualization of the underlying storage engine queries. That could be XM SQL, that could be SQL, DAX, and the query is also cleaned up and formatted. If you intercept these queries from the profiler, they are very different and with a lot of noise that makes it hard to read the query. So we made a big effort. I say we because actually I was part of the people who wrote this area of DAX Studio, and we spent a lot of time trying to figure out features that are useful when you have to optimize a query. But of course, optimizing a query is not something that you do every day, so I completely understand that when you need that, you still need DAX Studio, but you don't need DAX Studio just to write an evaluate statement and see the result, which is a big step forward. We have features like intercept all the queries, which listen to what happens in a analysis services database or in a Power BI desktop instance, so that you can navigate and intercept all the queries, including those executed from Excel. This is something that is more a feature like we intercept all the profiler events, and this is something that it's not impossible to implement in Power BI desktop, but the question is, does it make sense for the majority of the user? Probably no. But this is another feature we have here. Well, one feature that we have in Power BI desktop is the query builder. So as you saw, in Power BI desktop, we have the idea we can capture the query from a visual, or we can write a query from scratch, or the quick measure shows an evaluate summarized columns with everything. What we can do in DAX Studio is actually creating, for example, I want to see by brand and category, and I want to see the sales amount, and I want to, oh, sorry, I used too many things here. Let's go back here. So let's say brand, category, and just margin and margin percentage with a filter for the customer country, which could be, I don't know, is Canada, okay? And if I click update and I see this code, I can also run the query and see the result. So this is actually something that, it's a good feature. If you have to create a query to export data in Excel, that I will show you in a minute, or for paginated reports, well, this is easier to use, I would say. Control of the result. We can display the result in this result pane, but we can also create the result straight into a file, a text file, or an Excel file. If I click on static, I will create a new Excel file that has this content, or in a linked table in Excel, which means that we get, if it works, maybe that it doesn't work because I probably installed a release that is not working here. Oh yes, I had to click run before. I just chose the output, but now by clicking the result, so now this is not working probably because I have, because I selected this. Okay, so I have to start this again. So let me cancel it. I made two mistakes here. First, I just chose the linked output without clicking run. Then I clicked run by selecting just a part of the code, which generated syntax error. I have seen this in another screen I wasn't able to show you. But now let me start again. So I run the entire query using the linked table, and what I get, I move from the other screen, is this result, where we have the result, the same result that we have seen before, but now is pasted directly into a table in Excel, table that has the query embedded here, which means that once we open this file again, we just refresh the file, or we click open or refresh, and this is updated automatically. So this is something that when you need to export data in Excel, that could be very, very useful. This is very, very fast. Also, when you export hundreds of thousands of rows, imagine a list of products, a list of long list of customers with interesting KPIs, interesting information. That is something that we don't have today in Power BI. We don't have a way to export hundreds of thousands of rows easily in Excel in a way that is easy to refresh. And finally, this entire area, view matrix, is another feature that we have only in DAX Studio. So where am I spending memory for my model? What is the size of each table, the size of each column? This is another information we don't have. Information like several type of benchmark we can run, or integration with Excel, SQL profiler, and a way to export data as a batch, or, well, this view as is actually available in Power BI Desktop, but now I'm thinking, wait a minute, is this implemented or not? That's a good question. So if I create, and this is literally an unboxing, I have no idea if what I'm going to do is going to work or not, but the idea is the following. What if I have, let's say Canada only. Okay, I create a security role where I filter the customer where the country is equals Canada. So by defining this filter, what happens now? If I click on View as Canada only, this applies the filter to the report view. Now what happens to the query view? I have no idea. So let's start. Let's run this query, and the value is 10 billion. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let me check. No, 1,057,000. 1,057,000. Canada only. Sales amount 20 million. Let me think. This is strange. So let's try to refresh everything, refresh visuals. So if I stop viewing here, this 199. So yeah, 190. Oh yes, because I was okay. Wait a minute. I had a few selections made before. I'm not sure. So let me try again. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So this is 10 billion for everything. If I click on View as Canada only, sales amount is 1,057,000. So if I go back to DAX and I click run on sales amount again, is 1 billion. I don't see, okay, this is another thing. I don't see here View as anywhere. That this is something to add, because otherwise it could be very confusing. So I have to go back here, stop viewing. I go back in DAX Query View. I run this again. And now this is, you see why I like the automatic formatting, because I have to spend time counting the digits to understand it is 1 billion, 10 billion, or whatever. But actually, this is the number for the entire dataset. Sorry, the entire semantic model. Because by the way, now it's called semantic model, no longer dataset, which is a name I like, by the way. But that is good. I mean, the DAX Query View is executed in the current security context. So if we use View as, it works like DAX Studio. So it keeps that security active. It is just not displayed in this visualization. So this is another feature that is has to be implemented, I would say, because it's important to know in which security context we are operating. Otherwise, it could be confusing. But overall, I have to say, good job, very good job. For version 1 is amazing. Of course, as usual, there is always something to improve, but it's an excellent starting point. I'm happy to see a new feature with this level of quality. Of course, it will be improved. It has to be improved, but it's a very, very good starting point from now on. So, what to say? I'm really happy about this new release. As you have seen, even though I noticed a few bugs and a few possible improvements, I have to say for a version 1 of a new feature in Power BI Desktop, it has been a while since I have seen something so solid, so complete, because I'm so used to see these minimum viable products that are not enough to be usable in production and not enough to get traction, so to justify new features. And we have seen many new features in Power BI Desktop that didn't mature in a quick amount, in a short amount of time. So I think this is not the case. DAX Query View is a solid feature. I can see the work behind, and this is literally something that will enable a change in productivity for those users that cannot use an external tool. For those of you that used the DAX Studio in the past, you will not see a big difference, but the feature that enables you to write the definition of measure back in the model is something that can increase the productivity a lot, I have to say. Yes, there are still things, there are many details that can be improved, but actually this is something that is something I already started to adopt. So there are many features that when are in preview, you say, okay, let's wait for another month or 2 or 3 before we enable it. This one is a no-brainer. Enable it, use it. There are no side effects. It's very good. Good job, Microsoft. This time I have to say that that's a very good and solid feature we have in Power BI Desktop. I'm very happy, and as usual, enjoy DAX.